Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film that examines Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis and the ways in which it affects our communities, industries, and culture. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to launch this podcast series that will continue to explore issues facing the Louisiana coast through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. On this episode, we're speaking with Jonathan Foret, the executive director for the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center in Houma, Louisiana. He's also a proud native of Chauvin, Louisiana. And now, our interview with Jonathan Foret. So thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. So tell me about how you got started working in this field and why were you drawn to the Louisiana wetlands?
So I was born and raised in Chauvin, which is a little bit south of Houma. And so I've been, it all started when I was about 4 playing in the ditch. So I think that's the most fun I think I've ever had growing up was being able to play in the ditch. Now, I would not let my child play in the ditch nowadays with the information that I have of like, yeah, it's probably got some dirty stuff in there that I don't want my kids. But it was a lab, you know. I had my favorite present that I ever received was a minnow trap when I was about 7, and I could put it in the ditch and bait it with some bread and just catch all kinds of critters, little fish and snakes and crawfish and all that. And so it was a beautiful place to grow up, especially in the 80s. It was sort of, it feels like the heyday of Chauvin. You know, it was still a solid community with amenities and, you know, grocery stores and a pharmacy and church. Like it was a solid community in that time. And so, you know, growing up playing in the woods and just exploring, it was very much like you know, those films from the 80s too, like Lean on Me and The Goonies, you know, it was, growing up had that feeling that, you know, your parents could cut you loose and you didn't have to come back until the streetlights came back on, you know. And so I think that my connection to Southern Louisiana and the wetlands, I mean, that's in my blood. That's been in me from the beginning of, you know, working on trawl boats with my dad growing up to raise a little bit extra money to buy my first stereo system. CDs had just come out at that time. So it was mostly working on cassette tapes, you know. But, you know, so it was a way for me to earn money, but it was also a part of our culture and, you know, building skills, even survival skills, and knowing how to get food from the water and enjoying that and sharing that with family. You know, it was growing up, we always had crawfish boils, crab boils, shrimp boils, where you know, you put the newspaper out on the table and you just pour all the seafood out and you'd have, you know, 15 people there eating with you. So our families were always very close. You know, it's no surprise to me that Louisiana has the highest number of native-born residents, meaning you're born in Louisiana, you stay in Louisiana, you don't really move out, not too many people are moving in. And then when you look at the data and you go even deeper, you see that Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes in this area has the highest number of native-born residents in the state. So that means like we're the epicenter of people who are born here, raised here. You know, we love it. And it's a strong connection with friends and family. So, yeah, it's a beautiful place to grow up and to be.
Yeah, so it seems like it was really imprinted on you from a young age.
Yeah.
How important do you think that is for young people to be exposed to nature and develop that relationship early on?
It's extremely important, you know. I have a 2-year-old, and so we do our best to spend as much time outside and exploring, and there are new things every day. Every time we go out, there's something new that he can see. Because we have become so much involved with digital media and screens. And, I think that makes it even more important to me to make sure he has the opportunities to participate away from a screen, because it really makes me nervous that this next generation coming up will not have as much tactile time, if that makes sense. Not necessarily even outside, even inside. A screen is such an easy babysitter, and a lot of times parents are even using their screens, and so the kids are watching that and they just feel like that's the normal way. And I think they're gonna lose a lot of problem-solving skills, a lot of social skills, and so I do believe it's super important to get kids outside and understanding the world around them, so that way they will be more likely to protect it,
Right. So tell me about the South Louisiana Discovery Center.
Yeah.
What is its mission, and what are some of the things y'all do here?
Yeah. So the Wetlands Discovery Center, our mission is revolutionizing the way we think, teach, and learn about Louisiana's disappearing coast. That's our tagline. And the way that we do that is we've got scientists who work on our staff as in our program department. They have developed a curriculum that they can go out into middle school and elementary schools and supplement teachers' lessons in science. Let's say, for example, in third grade, you have to learn about soils. Well, the lessons that are taught here is just about regular soil where you might find anywhere. But what we do is we go in and we teach about alluvial soil, so that the students, even in third grade, understand that the soil that we are on and they are on was deposited by the Mississippi River not that long ago, when you think about it, right? And so, and also that alluvial soil is compacting and subsiding. So that way, even in the third grade, they begin to understand more about the environment that they live on, so that it's very relevant to their lives. So we do this, the Coastal Classroom program. We also worked with the National Center for Atmospheric Research to develop two curricula. One is hurricane resilience and one is called project resilience. And so both of those are being taught in all Terrebonne Parish high schools. So our school district has adopted them in the environmental science classroom. So that's pretty exciting. And then, we do the fun things like summer camps where we bring kids to the alligator farm and we take field trips with them. We have a program called Louisiana Lit. And so it's a play on Louisiana literature, but nowadays when something's cool, people say that's so lit. And so Louisiana Lit is a program where we have local authors come in and talk about their work. This month we have Melissa Martin with the Mosquito Supper Club out of New Orleans. She wrote an amazing cookbook. And so she'll be here to talk about that cookbook. It's called a cookbook, but it's more of like a textbook on how to be Cajun. She really just put so much effort and beauty into that book. So that's another exciting thing that we have. And of course, we have our big outdoor events, the Rougarou Fest. We do that in October, and we do the Ladybug Ball, which is more geared to younger kids, but it's teaching them about organic ways to deal with pests. And so ladybugs eat aphids, so we release a whole bunch of ladybugs and the kids get to collect them and bring them back to their garden. So trying to teach them a little bit more about organic gardening. And then of course, back to Rougarou Fest, it's just a celebration of bayou culture. We have tradition bearers that are there that we celebrate. It's just an all-around fun event, in the fall when it's a little bit cooler than the summertime. And
so all of that kind of goes back to helping the center just do what you guys do.
That's right. Yeah. So those are sort of our fundraisers that help to pay for all of our programming. Yeah.
So why do you think it's important to educate people about the Louisiana wetlands, and why are they something people should care about?
Yeah. I think that we are a bit of the canary in the coal mine, even for the rest of the world, when it comes to climate change and the impacts that sea level rise will have on coastal communities around the globe. Because we are on alluvial soil and our soil is subsiding, we here experience sea level rise at a faster rate. It's called relative sea level rise. So we're sinking, sea levels are rising, so we're gonna have to deal with a bit more water than other areas will have to. All of the challenges that we're facing, other folks are going to have to face. So I think that by paying attention to this area and seeing what's going on, it may help other places to do it a little bit better. I mean, we're trying.
Yeah.
We've got the Coastal Master Plan. We've got, the Morganza to the Gulf levee system. We are doing a lot to be able to continue living here successfully for as long as we can.
So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the recent groundbreaking on the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project. How do you feel about it, and what are its implications for the Louisiana coast?
So I think that, it's going to create some problems for some folks, like the oyster fishermen. But oysters weren't always in that location, right? And so it will have some negative impacts, but I think overall it's necessary. It's one tool in the toolkit to help us to stabilize the coast and providing more sediment to the areas that really need it. It feels like the right thing to do because it mimics Mother Nature. It kind of puts those tools to use. So I think that at the end of the day, it's definitely the right choice and the right thing to do. But I acknowledge also the fact that it's going to make things a little bit difficult for some folks, unfortunately.
Right. How will it affect the fishing community? What are their concerns there?
So it's about salinity levels, right? And so oysters need a particular amount of salinity, and so the fresh water coming down. If it's too much fresh water, and I'm not an oyster fisherman or a scientist that specializes in oysters, but just from what I understand is that it could kill the population of oysters because they can't move, right? Other animals might be able to move to find their happy salinity levels, but the oysters can't. So, I think there are efforts underway to mitigate as best that as the salinity levels change and moving oyster beds around. But again, I'm not an expert on that. But even here in Terrebonne, and we're not so close to the diversion. They're right now looking at adjusting the limits of speckled trout that you can catch. Want to reduce that a bit. So that means that there aren't as many speckled trout to catch as there. So then it's, what's the reason for that? And a lot of people assume that it's because the habitat is washing away. So there's not a whole lot of area for the fish to spawn and the little fish to kind of hide from predators to be able to grow up large enough to catch. So yes, the salinity levels are going to change because of the diversion. Hopefully in that area things will adjust, but I don't know if this is since we're talking about salt water, if I can take this in a different direction. But one of the things that a few years ago people started saying that insurance was going to be a big challenge for coastal residents, especially in coastal Louisiana. And that conversation had been going on. And then fast forward to today, and it's here. The things that people said were going to be a huge problem are now preventing people from being able to afford their mortgage payments and forcing people out of our communities. And people that we want to keep. These are good folks, tradition bearers of the culture. We want them to stay here, but then they just can't afford it. And so they're having to rethink where they live and want to live someplace a little bit more affordable because of the high insurance cost. Some people's insurance have doubled, tripled, The next thing that I think that we're gonna have to deal with will be salt in our drinking water, right? So the water processing plants here do a good job of taking out all the organics. So there's still carcinogens, there's still bad stuff that is in our tap water. But like the bacteria and those things, they're able to extract it, but they can't extract salt. They don't have the systems to be able to take the salt out. So if you look and see what's going on in southern Plaquemines right now, the Gulf of Mexico is coming up the river, right? And so the Army Corps of Engineers is looking to put what's called a salt wedge. So it's like a little triangle that's in the bottom of the river because salt water is a little bit heavier than fresh water. So the idea is that the salt water trying to come up from the Gulf up the Mississippi, where people use the Mississippi for their drinking water, the salt water just stops there and doesn't go over. Because right now in Plaquemines Parish, people are getting like 2 cases of drinking water a day. They're limited to that to solve this problem because their washing machines are corroding. Their dishwashers are corroding because they're running with salt water, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So they're gonna try to stop that in Belle Chase. They're gonna try to stop it, but everybody in southern Plaquemines currently, right now, is dealing with that problem, right? So here in Terrebonne Parish, we have 2 water plants. One pulls water from the intracoastal, and so at some points during the year, that becomes too salty, and they have to pull water from Bayou Black, right? Which isn't the freshest water. I mean, that's got its own problems, right? But then the other part, we pull water from Bayou Lafourche, and so that, we don't have issues with the salt. But sea level's rising, our water plants aren't prepared to have to deal with the saltwater problem. This is just beginning, but I promise you, if we would sit down and talk about this in 5 years, it's gonna be, wow, the salt water is really a problem. Sea levels are coming up, so then that water is gonna kind of get higher up in the rivers, and that's what I really believe that's what we need to start preparing for now, figuring that problem out, because it's hard to live, it's hard to afford the insurance, right? But some folks with means are able to figure it out. But then if there's salt water coming out our faucets, aside from each person having to buy a $20,000, reverse osmosis system or whatever that's called, right? To put in your house to take the salt out of your water. How are we gonna survive that? We didn't even get to hurricanes. You know what I mean? The damage that hurricanes. So we're talking about those are gonna be the major issues that we're trying to figure out insurance, trying to get those costs down. But then if you turn on your faucet and there's salt water coming out of it,
yeah, it's
what
a
are you
pretty
gonna do?
Basic necessity.
Yeah.
Everybody needs water.
Yeah.
So what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned over the years working on coastal issues? And has your perspective changed at all from when you started?
That's a great question, tough question. Maybe how fragile, I guess it's a twofold, I was gonna say how fragile it is, but it's also resilient. And to clarify that systems are resilient, people are not resilient, because that word gets thrown around a lot. And so there needs to be clarification on that, because people were tired of hearing that word around here, because I don't have a lot of money and this is where I live and I just get beat down and I have to fix it and figure it out, I'm resilient. No, you know? But systems can be made to be resilient, you know? Maybe people are tenacious, but I just think resilient is the wrong word for that. So I guess as resilient as these ecosystems are, they're also very fragile. That makes no sense whatsoever, right? But it just seems like, you know, our wetlands can take such a beating from hurricanes, from all the things that we've engineered in the past, you know, dredging canals, oil spills, all the things that we've hit with it. It's still, given a chance, it would heal, you know, given the right circumstances. So I think it's important not to take it for granted. It's easy to take it for granted. Growing up and really living in the environment, you know, my grandparents were gardeners and fishermen, and so that's what we did all the time. We were always outside, living off the land, living off of the water. And you would think that we would be better stewards of it, because that's our culture here. Our culture is very much entwined with the land and water. And yet I don't think we're such great stewards of protecting that. And I try not to be pessimistic, but I think where we are now, it's about celebrating what we have while we still have it, and acknowledging that we're probably not going to have it for a whole lot longer.
I think what I'm hearing from you is like, don't assume that things will be exactly the same, you know, 5 years from now.
Yeah.
You know, make the changes now that you can, but obviously not everything will stay the same.
Yeah. You know, after Hurricane Ida, that was the biggest pill for me to swallow. Was I just romanticized about raising my son in the same way that I was raised, you know? And the reality is that Terrebonne Parish of the 80s doesn't exist anymore. Like, it is just so drastically different for many reasons. And coming to terms with that was a little bit difficult, but I want him to have his own experience, and I will do everything that I can to make it as magical as mine was, even though it's going to be very different.
Right. Well, Jonathan, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Jonathan Foret. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can also watch a video version of this podcast on YouTube, which you can find a link to in the description. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through grant funds from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and is executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.